No dramatic news headline cutting through your morning routine. Just a weather map, quietly turning orange, county by county, until nearly half of England was sitting under a wall of heat that nobody truly expected this early in the year. And here is the part that should genuinely stop you in your tracks. This is not just warm weather. This is a structural shift in how British springs behave, and the numbers sitting behind those orange-colored maps tell a story that goes far deeper than whether you need sunscreen on your lunch break. Let's start with what the maps are actually showing right now, because this is where the real story begins. BlueX charts. Weather data is flagging a significant warm spell building across large parts of the United Kingdom, with temperatures in 19 counties breaking above the 23rd degree Celsius mark, a threshold that, just a decade ago, would have been considered a noteworthy summer achievement, let alone a spring occurrence. The headline figure is 28 C, and that number is not a freak outlier buried in one corner of one model. Multiple weather modeling systems are converging on that same number, pointing to the south and southeast of England as the epicenter of this surge. Greater London, Surrey, Berkshire, Hertfordshire, Cambridgeshire, Oxfordshire, Kent, Essex, Hampshire, Bedfordshire, Buckinghamshire, Nottinghamshire, Leicestershire, Warwickshire, Lincolnshire, Northamptonshire, Norfolk, Sussex, and decides to push northward and park itself over a country that was, until very recently, known primarily for its gray skies and persistent drizzle. The mechanics behind this surge are worth understanding because they explain not just what is happening now, but why this kind of event keeps repeating with greater frequency. A high-pressure system has been building and expanding across southern England, creating the kind of atmospheric stability that locks out the cloud cover and allows the sun to do real work on surface temperatures. Southerly winds are doing the heavy lifting here, dragging warm air northward from the continent, from regions that have themselves been sitting under unusually elevated temperatures. When that warm continental air meets the stable, high-pressure dome sitting over the UK, there is nowhere for the heat to go. It accumulates, it builds. And the temperature maps that meteorologists study go from green to yellow to orange in a matter of days, which is exactly what has been happening across the ECM and WF and GFS modeling systems that professional forecasters rely on. What makes this particular surge stand out from a regular spell of nice weather is the sheer spatial spread of it. It is one thing for London to hit 28 muscaroos. That happens. London's heat island effect, the urban density, the tarmac and concrete absorbing and radiating energy, all of that creates a microclimate that consistently runs warmer than surrounding areas. But when you start seeing 25 degrees and 26 degrees readings projected as far north as Yorkshire, when the Midlands are sitting comfortably in the mid to high 20s, when even parts of Wales are touching 23 degrees or 24 degrees, that tells you this is not a localized quirk. This is a system-wide event, and the breadth of it is precisely why 19 counties are appearing simultaneously on the elevated temperature watch list. The Met Office has a specific and carefully defined threshold for what constitutes an official heat wave in the UK, and it is important to understand this distinction because the media and public conversation often blurs the line between a very warm spell and an officially declared heat wave. In the southeast of England, including Greater London and the surrounding home counties, the official heat wave threshold sits at 28 degrees, sustained over a minimum of 3 consecutive days. In cooler regions, further north and west, that threshold drops to 25 C. So when weather, models start showing 28 degrees, not just for a single afternoon, but potentially across multiple consecutive days, forecasters start watching very carefully. The Met Office has acknowledged that the end of this period could turn rather warm, especially in the south, which in meteorological language is about as pointed a warning as you're likely to get before an amber heat health alert starts being discussed. And those health alerts matter enormously, because the public health dimension of this story is where the conversation has to go next. The UK Health Security Agency has been increasingly vocal in recent years about the danger that early season heat poses to the population, and the reasoning is straightforward once you understand it. When a heat wave arrives in July or August, the population has had weeks to acclimatize. Bodies have gradually adjusted to warmer ambient temperatures. People are sleeping with windows open, wearing lighter clothing, making unconscious behavioral adjustments. But when a surge like this one arrives in May, the body has not had that preparation time. Internal systems are still calibrated for cool, damp British spring weather. The shock of sudden intense heat on an unprepared physiology is measurably more dangerous than the same temperature arriving later in the season. And this is not a theoretical risk. It is backed by mortality data collected across multiple heat events in England over the past 2 decades. The populations most at risk during an early season surge like this are well documented. People over the age of 65 face significantly elevated danger, not just because of age-related physiological changes in thermoregulation, but because many older adults live alone, may not recognize the early signs of heat stress, and may have underlying cardiovascular or respiratory conditions that are directly worsened by sustained heat exposure. The research is consistent across studies. Respiratory deaths are particularly sensitive to temperature spikes, and cardiovascular mortality rises sharply when temperatures exceed threshold values for multiple consecutive days. Those with chronic conditions, heart disease, kidney disease, respiratory illness, face compounding risks. Infants and very young children are similarly vulnerable because their thermoregulatory systems are still developing. And then there are the outdoor workers, the construction laborers, the agricultural workers, the delivery drivers, people who do not have the option of retreating to an air-conditioned office when the temperature peaks in the early afternoon. Urban environments layer additional risk on top of all of this. The urban heat island effect, which is well understood and extensively documented, means that cities consistently run several degrees warmer than the surrounding countryside. In Greater London, which is projected to see some of the highest temperatures in this current surge, the body cannot recover from the heat stress of the day. Sleep quality drops. Cognitive function is impaired. The cumulative effect of multiple nights of disrupted sleep during a heat event is one of the factors that makes prolonged warm spells genuinely dangerous rather than merely uncomfortable. And it is one of the reasons why heat health professionals pay close attention, not just to daytime maximum temperatures, but to overnight minimum readings as well. The driest spring in nearly 7 decades in England has set a very specific stage for this temperature surge, and that context matters. When ground moisture levels are low, when reservoirs are operating below seasonal norms, when topsoil has dried and cracked across agricultural land, heat events hit differently. The evaporative cooling effect that moist soil and vegetation normally provides is reduced. More of the incoming solar energy goes directly into heating the air rather than evaporating surface water. Or the landscape bakes faster, the urban surfaces absorb more energy, and the peak temperatures that models predict become easier to hit and harder to moderate. The Environment Agency's data on this spring being exceptionally dry is not a peripheral footnote to the heat story. It is an active driver of it, an understanding that relationship between soil moisture, deficit, and peak temperature amplification is essential context that often gets lost when the media focuses purely on the thermometer numbers. Climate attribution science has become increasingly sophisticated, and the work being done by organizations like World Weather Attribution allows researchers to quantify with statistical precision how much more likely a specific heat event is in today's climate compared to a pre-industrial baseline. The findings for UK heat events are unambiguous. The likelihood of experiencing temperatures at the level currently being forecast for southern England has increased dramatically as a result of human-caused climate change. What might once have been a genuinely rare occurrence, a 1 in 50 or 1 in 100 year event, is now happening with a frequency that makes the rarity framing statistically dishonest. Each incremental degree of global average warming shifts the probability distribution of extreme temperatures, meaning the upper tail of what is possible keeps moving further and further into territory that previous generations never experienced. The 20 Itauders threshold that the Met Office uses for Southeast England heatwave definitions was, when originally established, calibrated to a climate that no longer exists. The infrastructure implications of this shift are significant and underappreciated in public discourse. The UK's housing stock was largely designed and built for a cool, temperate climate. Insulation standards that are excellent for retaining heat in winter become a liability when external temperatures rise. The proportion of UK homes with air conditioning remains very low compared to countries with historically hotter climates, a reasonable historical adaptation to a country that rarely needed mechanical cooling, but a growing vulnerability as that historical climate becomes less and less representative of what is actually happening. Transport infrastructure, particularly rail networks, has well-documented temperature sensitivity, with speed restrictions imposed on lines during heat events to prevent track buckling. Hospitals, schools, care homes, many of these buildings were not designed with thermal management as a primary concern, and retrofitting them is an expensive, slow process that is running well behind the pace at which the climate is changing. What the weather maps are showing right now is not simply a nice warm spell arriving ahead of schedule. It is a data point in a much longer and more consequential trend line. The 19 counties sitting above 23 on those maps, the 28 peak being flagged for the southeast, the southerly winds dragging continental warmth northward into a country not built to manage it. All of this is a preview of what British summers are going to look like with increasing regularity. The question is not whether these events will keep happening. The scientific consensus on that is settled. The question is whether the planning, the infrastructure investment, the public health preparation, and the individual awareness keep pace with a climate that is moving faster than the systems designed to respond to it. So if you are in one of those 19 counties over the coming days, pay attention to more than just whether you need to pack a light jacket. Check on older neighbors. Keep hydrated consistently, not just when you feel thirsty. By the time thirst signals strongly, the body is already under stress. Avoid the peak heat window between midday and 4 in the afternoon if you can. Keep your living. Spaces as cool as possible, using the morning hours before external temperatures rise, then close windows and blinds to trap that cooler air inside. These are not complicated interventions. They are simple, evidence-based behaviors that genuinely reduce the health burden of heat events, and they become more important, not less, as the events themselves become more frequent and more intense. The maps are orange, the models are converging, and the UK, county by county, is learning, or rather being forced to relearn, what it means to live in a climate that is no longer the one that built its infrastructure, designed its homes, or calibrated its public health responses. This heat surge is real, it is here, and it matters far beyond the numbers on a thermometer.